Undercover Black CEO walks into his own store and finds a waitress in tears. The ending is shocking. The bell above the door chimed with a cheerful melody that felt completely out of place the moment Jeremiah Cole stepped inside his own restaurant. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the air like electricity before a storm. After building his restaurant chain from a single food truck into 37 locations across 3 states, Jeremiah had developed an almost supernatural ability to read the energy of a room. And right now, this place felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. He adjusted the baseball cap pulled low over his eyes and slipped his hands into the pockets of his worn jeans. To anyone looking, he was just another traveling businessman grabbing a late lunch. No one in this mid-tier franchise location had ever seen their CEO in person. Jeremiah had made sure of that. Corporate visits were always announced weeks in advance, giving managers time to polish everything to perfection. But anonymous letters had a way of cutting through corporate bureaucracy like a knife through butter. The envelope had arrived at his personal office 3 days ago, addressed simply to the real boss. Inside, a handwritten note in careful cursive. Your employees are being stolen from and broken down. If you really care about the people who make your profits, come see for yourself. Don't announce it. Just come. Location 23 on Riverside Drive. Ask yourself why good people keep quitting. No signature. No return address. Just raw honesty that had kept Jeremiah awake for 2 nights straight. Now, sliding into the corner booth with its cracked vinyl seats and wobbly table, he understood why someone had risked their job to write that letter. The restaurant should have been bustling with the usual lunch crowd, but instead felt hollow, tense. Customers ate quickly with their heads down. Staff moved with the careful precision of people walking on eggshells. And there, behind the counter, was the reason why. She couldn't have been more than 22, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and a smile that looked like it was held together by sheer willpower. Her name tag read, Ava. And even from across the room, Jeremiah could see the exhaustion in her shoulders, the way she flinched every time the kitchen door swung open. She moved with practiced efficiency, refilling coffee cups and clearing tables, but there was something fragile about her, like a bird with a broken wing still trying to fly. Jeremiah ordered a coffee in the daily special from a different server, a nervous teenager who seemed relieved to take an order without any complications. While he waited, he watched Ava work, noting how other employees seemed to cluster around her during brief moments between tasks. She was clearly well liked by her coworkers, which made the tension even more puzzling. Then Doug appeared, and everything clicked into place. The manager emerged from the back office like a storm cloud, his polo shirt stretched tight over his beer belly, his face already twisted into the expression of someone looking for a fight. Jeremiah had seen his type before, middle management drunk on tiny amounts of power, the kind of person who kicked down because they were too weak to punch up. Martinez! Doug's voice cracked across the restaurant like a whip, causing several customers to look up from their meals. What the hell is this? He was holding a receipt, waving it in the air like evidence in a trial. Ava hurried over, and Jeremiah could see her hands trembling slightly as she approached her manager. I'm sorry, Doug, I don't understand what. Table 6 ordered extra cheese on their burger, and you only charged them for the regular burger. That's 65 cents out of our pocket because you can't do basic math. Jeremiah's jaw tightened. 65 cents. The man was humiliating an employee in front of a room full of customers over 65 cents. I can fix it right now, Ava said quietly, reaching for the register. I'll pay the difference myself if... Oh, you'll pay the difference all right, Doug snarled, moving closer to her in a way that made Jeremiah's hands clench into fists. But that's not the point. The point is that you're costing us money with your careless mistakes. Again. The restaurant had gone completely quiet now. Even the kitchen staff had stopped moving to watch the scene unfold. Ava's face was flushed with embarrassment, but she kept her chin up, refusing to break down in front of everyone. I understand, she said, her voice steady despite the obvious humiliation. It won't happen again. You're damn right it won't, Doug said, pulling out his phone and making a show of opening what looked like a scheduling app. Because I'm cutting your Friday night shift. Maybe a lighter schedule will help you focus better. Jeremiah watched the color drain from Ava's face. Friday nights were the money shifts, the busy times when servers could actually make decent tips. Taking that away wasn't just punishment, it was economic warfare. Doug, please. Ava's voice cracked slightly. I need those hours. I can't afford to lose. Should have thought about that before you decided to give away our profits, Doug said dismissively, already turning away. And next time, maybe you'll remember that attention to detail actually matters in this business. He stalked back toward his office, leaving Ava standing alone in the middle of the restaurant floor. For a moment, she just stood there, processing what had just happened. Then Jeremiah saw her shoulders start to shake, and he realized she was fighting back tears. The other customers had already returned to their meals, pretending they hadn't witnessed anything. The teenage server who had taken Jeremiah's order busied himself with cleaning tables that were already clean. Even Ava's co-workers, who had seemed so close to her earlier, suddenly found urgent tasks that required their immediate attention. And that's when Jeremiah understood the real problem. This wasn't just about one abusive manager. It was about a culture of fear that had infected everything. Doug ruled through intimidation, and everyone else had learned to keep their heads down to avoid becoming his next target. Ava wiped her eyes quickly and returned to work, but Jeremiah could see the change in her demeanor. The fragile smile was gone, replaced by the blank expression of someone just trying to survive until their shift ended. She moved mechanically now, no longer the engaged employee who had been connecting with her coworkers just minutes before. Jeremiah's coffee had gone cold while he watched the entire scene unfold, but he barely noticed. His mind was racing, calculating, planning. The anonymous letter had been right. Good people were being broken down here, and it was happening in his name, under his company's logo. He thought about his own journey, starting with nothing but determination and a food truck parked outside construction sites. He built his business on the principle that employees were family, that treating people right wasn't just good ethics, it was good business. But somewhere along the way, as the company grew and he'd been forced to rely on managers he'd never met, that principle had gotten lost. Watching Ava struggle to maintain her composure while continuing to serve customers with professional grace, Jeremiah felt something ignite in his chest. This wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to his assistant. Clear my schedule for the next 2 weeks. I'm conducting a field investigation. Then he deleted the message from his sent folder and powered off the phone. The real work was about to begin, and Doug had no idea that the traveling customer in the corner booth was about to become his worst nightmare. 20 minutes later, Jeremiah watched as Ava approached his table with a fresh pot of coffee, her professional mask firmly back in place. Up close, he could see the telltale redness around her eyes and the way she held her shoulders just a little too rigid, the posture of someone fighting to maintain control. Can I warm that up for you? She asked, gesturing to his untouched cup with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Actually, Jeremiah said softly, I was wondering if you could sit for just a minute. You look like you could use a friendly ear. Ava glanced quickly toward the back office, where Doug had disappeared, then shook her head. I appreciate that, but I really can't. I'm working, and my manager doesn't like us socializing with customers. I notice, Jeremiah said gently. That was rough what happened earlier. Over 65 cents, no less. Something flickered across Ava's face, surprise that someone had actually paid attention, mixed with embarrassment that a stranger had witnessed her humiliation. She shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the nearly empty restaurant. It's fine, she said automatically. Just part of the job. No, Jeremiah said firmly but quietly. It's really not. The certainty in his voice seemed to catch her off guard. For a moment, her carefully constructed professional facade cracked, and he glimpsed the exhausted young woman underneath. Look, he continued, I'm just a guy passing through town, so I have no skin in this game. But I've worked in restaurants before, And what I just saw, that wasn't management. That was bullying. Ava's grip tightened on the coffee pot. You don't understand. This is a good job. I need this job. Good jobs don't make you cry at work, Jeremiah observed. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the scarred table. Then Ava seemed to deflate slightly, the fight going out of her shoulders. He's going to cut more of my shifts, she whispered, finally sliding into the seat across from him. He always does this, finds tiny mistakes and uses them as excuses to punish people. Last month, he wrote up Sandra for being 2 minutes late, even though her car broke down. The month before that, he fired Miguel for attitude because Miguel asked why his paycheck was $40 short. Jeremiah leaned forward slightly. Short $40? That's not a mistake, that's theft. Ava's eyes widened, and she glanced nervously toward the office again. You can't say things like that. If Doug heard, what would he do? Fire you for talking to a customer? Jeremiah kept his voice level, but inside, his anger was building. Ava, can I ask you something? How long have you been working here? 8 months, she said. It's my second job. I'm studying hospitality management at the community college, trying to save up for a 4-year program. And in 8 months, have you gotten any raises? Any recognition for good work? Ava laughed bitterly. Raises? Doug says the budget doesn't allow for raises until we prove we can stop hemorrhaging money. But we're always hemorrhaging money, according to him. No matter how busy we get, no matter how hard we work, there's always some crisis that means we can't afford to pay people what they're worth. But Doug seems to be doing just fine, Jeremiah observed. Something shifted in Ava's expression, a flicker of anger mixed with fear. She looked around the restaurant one more time, then leaned closer to Jeremiah. Can you keep a secret? She whispered. Jeremiah nodded. 3 weeks ago, I was here late helping close, and Doug left his office computer unlocked when he went to the bathroom. I wasn't snooping, I swear. I was just walking by, and I saw these spreadsheets on his screen. They had our supplier information, but the numbers were all wrong. Way higher than what I know we actually order. She paused, chewing her lower lip nervously. Go on, Jeremiah encouraged. So I looked closer, and there were these invoices for a catering company I'd never heard of, Premier Food Solutions. But the weird thing was, the orders were for exactly the kinds of supplies we always seem to be running out of. Cases of premium coffee, imported olive oil, the good steaks that we're always told are temporarily unavailable. Jeremiah's blood began to simmer. What else did you see? Employee timesheets that didn't match what we actually worked. Like Sandra was scheduled for 32 hours last week, but the sheet said 28. And there were cash transaction logs that showed sales we definitely didn't make, like a $300 catering order for a business lunch that never happened. What did you do? Nothing at first. I thought maybe I was misunderstanding something. But then Doug came back and saw me looking. He went ballistic. Said if I ever touched his computer again, or if I mentioned what I saw to anyone, he'd make sure I was fired for theft myself. He said he had security cameras that could prove I was stealing, even if I wasn't. Ava's voice was shaking now. Ever since then, he's been making my life hell. Every tiny mistake gets magnified. Every shift gets scrutinized. He's trying to build a case to fire me, I know it. And the worst part is, I think he really is stealing from the company, selling supplies to his fake catering business, and skimming our hours to cover the paper trail. Jeremiah sat back, processing what he just heard. His suspicions were confirmed. Doug wasn't just an abusive manager. He was a criminal, systematically robbing the company while terrorizing employees to keep them quiet. Ava, he said carefully, have you told anyone else about this? She shook her head miserably. Who would I tell? Corporate? Doug handles all the communication with corporate. My coworkers? They're all just as scared as I am. We all need these jobs. You know what you saw was wrong, though. Of course I do. But what am I supposed to do about it? I'm just a waitress. Jeremiah looked at this brave young woman who was risking everything just by talking to him, and felt his resolve crystallize into something unbreakable. "You're not just anything," he said firmly. "You're someone who stands up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. That makes you pretty extraordinary in my book." Jeremiah left the restaurant that afternoon with his mind spinning like a tornado. He walked 3 blocks to his rental car, checking over his shoulder twice to make sure no one from the restaurant could see him. Only when he was safely inside the vehicle did he allow himself to process the full scope of what Ava had revealed. Doug wasn't just an abusive manager, he was running a sophisticated theft operation right under corporate's nose. And he was using fear and intimidation to keep his victims silent. Jeremiah pulled out a prepaid phone he'd picked up that morning, one completely disconnected from his corporate accounts. The number he dialed was memorized, never stored in contacts. "Marcus? It's me. I need you to run a quiet audit on location 23, Riverside Drive." Marcus Chin was his head of internal investigations, a former FBI forensic accountant who could find discrepancies in financial records like a bloodhound tracking a scent. "How quiet are we talking?" Marcus's voice was cautious. "Ghost quiet. I don't want anyone at corporate knowing we're looking. Focus on vendor payments, employee timesheets, and any catering accounts or side businesses connected to the manager, Douglas. I need his last name. I'll find it. What's the timeline?" "Yesterday," Jeremiah said grimly. "And Marcus? When you find what I think you're going to find, don't take any action yet. Just document everything. I want this airtight before we move." He spent the next hour in his hotel room, researching Doug's background through public records. What he found made his stomach turn. Doug Kellerman had been fired from 2 previous restaurant management positions, one for inventory discrepancies, and another for creating a hostile work environment. Somehow, his hiring manager had missed these red flags, or ignored them. The next morning, Jeremiah was back at the restaurant, this time dressed as a construction worker grabbing breakfast before an early shift. He watched Sandra, the employee Ava had mentioned, arrive 10 minutes early only to be berated by Doug for parking in the wrong spot. The humiliation was swift and public, designed to set the tone for everyone else. "I don't care if the lot's empty," Doug snapped. "Rules are rules. You park in the employee section or you don't park here at all." Sandra apologized profusely, but Jeremiah could see the resignation in her eyes. She'd given up fighting back long ago. Over the next 3 days, Jeremiah became a regular fixture, always choosing different disguises and sitting in different sections. He witnessed Doug's reign of terror from every angle, servers being written up for microscopic infractions, kitchen staff being sent home early for overstaffing, when they desperately needed the hours, and employees being forced to work through breaks because they were behind schedule. On Thursday evening, he watched Doug corner Miguel, the young man Ava had mentioned. Miguel was defending a new hire who'd accidentally dropped a plate. "It was just an accident, Doug. She's been working really hard. Are you questioning my judgment?" Doug's voice was dangerous, low enough that customers couldn't hear but loud enough for all the staff to witness. "Because last I checked, I'm the manager here, not you." Miguel's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "No, sir. You're right. That's what I thought. And since you've got so much energy to argue, you can stay late and deep clean the freezer. Unpaid." Jeremiah watched Miguel's shoulders slump in defeat, and something crystallized in his mind. Tomorrow night, he would make his move. Friday evening came with a dinner rush that pushed the understaffed restaurant to its breaking point. Jeremiah sat in his usual corner booth, watching Ava work a section meant for 2 servers while Doug stood by the register, arms crossed, making pointed comments about efficiency. When the rush finally died down around 9 o'clock, Jeremiah made his move. He caught Ava's attention and gestured for her to come over, then slipped a business card face down across the table. "Don't look at it now," he said quietly. "Wait until you're alone. When you see what it says, email me everything you told me the other day, plus anything else you can remember." Photos, documents, names, dates, everything. Ava's hand hovered over the card. I don't understand. Who are you? Someone who can actually do something about this situation, Jeremiah said. But I need proof. Real evidence. I could lose my job. You're going to lose it anyway, Jeremiah said gently. People like Doug don't stop escalating. They keep pushing until they find an excuse to get rid of anyone who might threaten them. Ava's hand closed over the card, sliding it into her apron pocket without looking. I'll think about it. But even as she said it, Jeremiah could see the doubt in her eyes. Fear was a powerful motivator, and Doug had spent months cultivating it. His answer came 2 hours later, just as the restaurant was closing. Jeremiah watched through the window as Doug exploded at Ava for defending the new hire who'd dropped a plate earlier. I'm writing you up for insubordination, Doug snarled, loud enough for Jeremiah to hear through the glass. Questioning my authority in front of other employees. That's a final warning, Martinez. One more incident and you're gone. Ava stood there taking the abuse, her face flushed with anger and humiliation. When Doug finally stalked away, she stood alone in the empty dining room for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone. Jeremiah's email notification chimed 20 minutes later. The subject line read, "You asked for everything? Here it is." Attached were 17 photos and a detailed timeline of every incident she could remember. At the bottom of the email, she'd written, I don't know who you really are, but I hope you can help. We're all drowning here. Jeremiah stared at the evidence filling his phone screen and smiled grimly. Doug had no idea that his reign of terror was about to come to a very abrupt end. Jeremiah's hotel room had been transformed into a makeshift command center. The desk was covered with printed emails, his laptop displayed multiple spreadsheets, and sticky notes covered nearly every surface. It was 3 a.m, and he'd been poring over Ava's evidence for 5 hours straight, each revelation more damning than the last. The email had been just the beginning. 2 hours after sending it, Ava had shown up at his hotel. She'd somehow tracked down his room number through sheer determination. She'd looked terrified but resolute, clutching a small USB drive like it contained nuclear codes. I went back after closing, she'd whispered in the hallway. Doug always leaves his office unlocked when he's doing the final count because he thinks everyone's gone home. I copied everything I could find. Now, staring at the evidence spread before him, Jeremiah understood why she'd looked so frightened. This wasn't just theft, it was a masterclass in corporate fraud. The USB drive contained nearly 2 years' worth of falsified records. Doug had created an entire phantom business called Premier Food Solutions, complete with fake invoices, fabricated purchase orders, and a sophisticated paper trail that would have fooled most auditors. The beauty of the scheme was its simplicity. Doug would order premium supplies for the restaurant using corporate accounts, then immediately sell those same supplies to his fake catering company at inflated prices. Jeremiah pulled up one particularly egregious example. The restaurant had ordered 50 pounds of premium Angus beef at $28 per pound, a legitimate purchase for their weekend special. But according to Doug's falsified records, that same beef had been immediately sold to Premier Food Solutions for $45 per pound, generating an instant profit of $850. The kicker? The beef never left the restaurant's freezer. Doug was literally selling their own inventory back to himself at marked up prices, then pocketing the difference. Son of a bitch, Jeremiah muttered, reaching for his phone. Marcus needed to see this immediately. Do you have any idea what time it is? Marcus's voice was groggy but alert within seconds, the instinct of someone who'd worked too many late-night investigations. I need you to access Location 23's vendor payment records for the past 18 months, Jeremiah said without preamble. Look for any payments to Premier Food Solutions. Cross-reference them with actual inventory received. The sound of Marcus's laptop booting up came through the phone. Give me 5 minutes. While he waited, Jeremiah continued analyzing Ava's evidence. The payroll theft was even more insidious than the inventory fraud. Doug had been systematically shaving hours from employee timesheets, just enough to fly under the radar. 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, occasionally a full half hour during shift changes when employees couldn't easily verify their exact clock-in times. The stolen time added up to a staggering amount. Sandra alone had lost 47 hours over the past 3 months, nearly $300 in wages. Miguel was missing 62 hours. Ava herself had been cheated out of 38 hours, including the overtime she should have earned during particularly busy shifts. Jesus Christ! Marcus's voice cut through Jeremiah's calculations. Boss, this Premier Food Solutions thing is everywhere. They've received over $47,000 in payments from your restaurant in the past year alone. 47,000? Jeremiah felt his blood pressure spike. What about inventory receipts? That's the thing. According to our supplier records, the restaurant never actually received most of these orders. But the payments went through anyway, all approved by the location manager. Jeremiah closed his eyes, trying to process the full scope of the theft. Marcus, I need you to run a trace on Premier Food Solutions. Corporate registration, bank accounts, anything you can find. But do it quietly. Use our external investigators, not internal resources. Already on it. But boss, if this is as big as it looks, we need to involve legal immediately. I know. Set up a meeting with Jennifer for tomorrow morning. And Marcus? Start running similar audits on our other locations. If Doug learned this system somewhere else, or if he's taught it to other managers. The thought made Jeremiah's stomach churn. Doug's franchise wasn't an isolated incident. It could be a symptom of a much larger disease spreading through his company. He hung up and returned to the evidence, this time focusing on the employee documentation Ava had provided. Her photos showed a pattern of systematic abuse that went far beyond financial theft. Doug had been building disciplinary files on every employee, documenting minor infractions and fabricating others to create grounds for termination whenever convenient. One photo showed Ava's personnel file, thick with write-ups for alleged infractions. Attitude problems, questioning management decisions, failure to follow uniform standards. None of it was true. Jeremiah had watched her work for days and seen nothing but professionalism under impossible circumstances. The most damning evidence was a handwritten note in Doug's own writing, photographed inside Sandra's file. Building case for termination. Target date, end of month. Reason, pattern of tardiness and poor attitude. Will save $400 per month in wages. Sandra, the same employee Jeremiah had watched arrive early every single day, only to be berated for parking violations and imaginary mistakes. At 4:30 in the morning, Jeremiah finally closed his laptop and rubbed his burning eyes. The evidence was overwhelming, but it raised an uncomfortable question. How had Doug been able to operate with such impunity for so long? Where were the corporate oversight systems that should have caught this? His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Premier Food Solutions registered to Douglas Kellerman, same address as the restaurant. Bank account opened 14 months ago. This guy isn't even trying to hide it. Jeremiah stared at the message, feeling a cold rage settle in his chest. Doug had been so confident in his position, so certain that no one would question his authority, that he hadn't even bothered to create a sophisticated cover story. He'd just stolen openly, believing his employees were too scared and corporate was too distant to ever discover the truth. But he'd made one critical miscalculation. He'd underestimated a 22-year-old waitress who refused to stay silent about injustice. Tomorrow, Jeremiah would start building the legal case that would bring Doug's empire of fear crashing down. But tonight, he allowed himself a moment of anticipation, imagining the look on Doug's face when he realized that the quiet customer in the corner booth had been watching his every move. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The morning of reckoning arrived exactly 1 week later, gray and overcast, as if the weather itself sensed the storm about to break. Jeremiah sat in the passenger seat of a black SUV parked across from the restaurant, watching the morning shift arrive through tinted windows. Ava walked in at exactly 7:55, 5 minutes early as always, her shoulders already tense for whatever fresh hell Doug would unleash today. Everyone clear on the plan? Jeremiah asked, adjusting his tie. After a week of disguises, wearing his tailored charcoal suit felt like putting on armor. Jennifer Walsh, his head legal counsel, nodded grimly from the back seat. We go in quiet, present the evidence, and give him one chance to explain himself before we make the arrest call. Marcus Chin checked his tablet one final time. All the documentation is loaded and ready. Bank records, vendor receipts, employee timesheets, everything cross-referenced and verified. Detective Ray Morrison, on loan from the County Fraud Division, cracked his knuckles. I've seen enough white-collar criminals to know the type. He'll either collapse completely or try to bluster his way out. Either way, he's going down. Jeremiah took a deep breath, thinking about all the employees inside who had suffered under Doug's reign of terror. Let's end this. They crossed the street like a small army, moving with the coordinated precision of people who had spent days preparing for this moment. Jeremiah pushed through the front door first, and the familiar chime that had greeted him as a disguised customer now announced his arrival as an avenging angel. The restaurant fell silent. Ava looked up from the coffee station, her eyes widening as she took in Jeremiah's transformation from mysterious customer to corporate executive. Sandra froze mid-step with a tray of plates. Even the kitchen staff emerged to peer through the service window. Doug bounded out of his office with his usual aggressive energy, ready to greet what he assumed were important customers. His practiced smile faltered when he saw the stern expressions and formal attire of the group. Good morning, Doug said, his voice already taking on a nervous edge. Are you folks here for a catering consultation? Because I'd be happy to discuss our corporate packages. Douglas Kellerman. Jeremiah interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. I'm Jeremiah Cole, CEO of this company. We need to talk. The color drained from Doug's face as if someone had opened a valve. His mouth worked soundlessly for several seconds before he managed to stammer. Mr. Cole? Sir, I had no idea you were visiting. I would have prepared. I'm sure you would have, Jeremiah said coldly. That's exactly why we didn't announce this visit. He gestured to the team behind him. This is Jennifer Walsh, our legal counsel, Marcus Chin, head of internal audit, and Detective Morrison from the County Fraud Division. We're here to discuss some irregularities in your store's financial records. Doug's eyes darted frantically between the faces surrounding him, his mind clearly racing to calculate how much they might know. Irregularities? I'm sure there's been some mistake. I run a tight ship here, by the books. By the books? Marcus stepped forward, tablet in hand. Then perhaps you can explain Premier Food Solutions. Doug's face went from pale to ashen. We work with many vendors. I can't be expected to remember every. You can't remember a company that you own? Jennifer's voice was razor sharp. A company registered to your personal address that has received over $47,000 from this restaurant in the past 18 months? The restaurant staff watched in stunned silence as their tormentor began to unravel. Jeremiah could see the realization dawning in their eyes. The mysterious customer who had spoken to Ava wasn't just anyone. He was the man whose name was on their paychecks. Furthermore, Marcus continued, we have documentation showing systematic theft of employee wages, unauthorized deductions, falsified timesheets, and deliberate hour reductions totaling over $8,000 across your current staff. Doug's lawyer instincts finally kicked in, though far too late. Now wait just a minute. You can't come in here making accusations without evidence? Jeremiah pulled out his phone and began reading. Case of premium ribeye steaks, ordered January 15th for $860, immediately resold to Premier Food Solutions for $1,400. Same steaks, same order, same day. Only problem is, the steaks never left this building. He looked up to meet Doug's panicked eyes. Should I continue? Because we have documentation going back 20 months. Thousands of dollars in inventory sold to yourself at inflated prices, employee wages stolen through falsified records, and a pattern of workplace abuse designed to keep your victims silent. Doug's composure cracked completely. This is insane. You're destroying my career over some accounting errors. I've been loyal to this company for. Loyal? Jeremiah's voice rose, his controlled anger finally breaking through. You've been stealing from the employees who trusted you and the company that employed you. You've created a culture of fear and abuse in a restaurant that bears my name. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the usual sounds of the kitchen had stopped. Douglas Kellerman. Detective Morrison stepped forward, his badge visible. You're under arrest for embezzlement, wage theft, and corporate fraud. Doug's legs seemed to give out. He stumbled backward against the counter, his face a mask of shock and defeat. Wait, you can't. I can explain everything. I can pay it back. The time for explanations was months ago, Jeremiah said quietly. You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out once the detective is finished. As the handcuffs clicked around Doug's wrists, something magical happened. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the restaurant like a storm cloud began to lift. Shoulders straightened. Eyes brightened. For the first time in months, the staff looked like people instead of prisoners. Ava stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. But these weren't tears of humiliation or fear. These were tears of justice finally served. Thank you, she whispered to Jeremiah as Doug was led away. Thank you for believing us. Jeremiah nodded, watching his employees begin to smile for the first time since he'd started observing them. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up. The nightmare was finally over. 3 months later, Jeremiah stood in the same corner booth where this entire journey had begun, but everything had changed. The restaurant hummed with an energy he'd never seen during his undercover visits. Genuine laughter from the kitchen, servers moving with confidence instead of fear, and customers lingering over their meals instead of rushing to escape the toxic atmosphere. At the center of it all was Ava Martinez, but she was barely recognizable as the broken young woman he'd first seen fighting back tears. Gone was the nervous, defeated waitress who'd flinched at every sound. In her place stood a confident supervisor, moving through the dining room with natural authority, checking on tables, encouraging her team, and solving problems with the kind of leadership that couldn't be taught, only unleashed. Table 12 needs extra napkins, and the family at 6 wants to know if we can accommodate a nut allergy. She called to Sandra, who responded with a smile and a crisp, "On it, boss." The transformation had been remarkable to witness. Within 2 weeks of Doug's arrest, the entire staff had emerged from their shells like flowers after a long winter. Employee satisfaction scores had skyrocketed. Customer complaints had virtually disappeared. And most importantly, the people who worked here looked happy again. Jeremiah's corporate team had worked overtime to right Doug's wrongs. Every stolen wage had been calculated and repaid with interest. 3 employees who'd been wrongfully terminated, including Miguel, who'd been fired for attitude the day after Doug's arrest, had been rehired with back pay and formal apologies. The falsified disciplinary records had been expunged, and a new management structure had been implemented with built-in oversight mechanisms to prevent future abuse. But the most satisfying change was watching Ava step into her new role as if she'd been born for it. Under the mentorship of regional manager Sarah Chin, Marcus's sister, and a 20-year veteran of restaurant management, Ava had blossomed into exactly the kind of leader Jeremiah had always envisioned for his company. "Mr. Cole?" Ava appeared at his table with a fresh cup of coffee, her smile radiant. 3 months ago, she'd been afraid to make eye contact. Now she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth. "Just Jeremiah," he said, as he had every time she'd called him by his title. "How are things going?" "Better than I ever imagined," she said, glancing around the bustling restaurant. "Miguel's already talking about applying for the assistant manager training program, and Sandra's night shift numbers are through the roof. Sarah says we're on track to be the highest performing location in the region by year-end." Jeremiah smiled, but he could see something else in her expression, a mix of gratitude and lingering disbelief that her life had changed so dramatically. "Ava, could you sit for a minute? I have something I want to discuss with you." She glanced around the restaurant, but the dinner rush wouldn't start for another hour, and her team was running smoothly. She slid into the booth across from him, curious. You know, Jeremiah began. When I first walked into this place, I was expecting to find some inventory discrepancies, maybe a lazy manager cutting corners. I never expected to find someone with your kind of courage. Ava shook her head. I wasn't courageous. I was terrified every single day. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Jeremiah said gently. It's doing the right thing despite being afraid. You risked everything to expose the truth, your job, your financial security, your future. That's the definition of bravery. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an elegant envelope. Which brings me to why I'm really here today. Ava stared at the envelope as if it might bite her. What is this? Open it. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. As she read, her eyes grew wide, then filled with tears, but like the tears she'd shed when Doug was arrested, these were tears of joy and disbelief. This is a full scholarship, she whispered, to the State University's Hospitality Management program. For years, everything covered, tuition, books, even living expenses. The Jeremiah Cole Foundation believes in investing in people who demonstrate exceptional character and leadership potential, he said formally. Then his voice softened. You were willing to fight for what's right when it mattered most. That's exactly the kind of person who should be running restaurants, not just working in them. Ava stared at the letter, tears streaming down her face. I can't accept this. It's too much. Actually, you can't refuse it, Jeremiah said with a grin. The scholarship committee has already voted. You start in the fall semester, and Sarah has agreed to adjust your schedule so you can work part-time while you study. You'll graduate with a business degree and 4 years of management experience. But why? Ava asked through her tears. Why would you do this for me? Jeremiah looked around the transformed restaurant, watching employees who'd once cowered in fear now working with pride and purpose. Because you saved this place. You saved these people. And you reminded me why I started this company in the first place, to create opportunities for people to build better lives. He stood to leave, but paused at her shoulder. Besides, in 4 years when you graduate, I'm going to need someone to help me expand into new markets. Think you might be interested in a career in corporate hospitality? Ava laughed through her tears, clutching the scholarship letter like a lifeline. I think I might be. As Jeremiah walked toward the door, he turned back one last time. Ava was already back on her feet, moving through the dining room with renewed purpose, the scholarship letter tucked safely in her apron pocket. She caught his eye and mouthed, "Thank you," but he shook his head and pointed around the restaurant. The thanks belonged to her. She'd turned a house of fear into a home of hope, and in doing so, she'd reminded him what true leadership looked like. Sometimes the most shocking endings were the ones where justice actually prevailed.